Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The battlefield crackled with the chaos of war. Explosions thundered from every direction, and energy blasts streaked across the sky. Bumblebee ducked behind a smoldering boulder, sparks flying from his damaged armor. The Autobot's optics flickered briefly, but his determination never wavered. Just ahead, across the smoldering battlefield, his mortal enemy, Megatron, towered over the wreckage, his dark silhouette framed against the blazing horizon. Bumblebee knew he was outmatched. Megatron had been relentless, and this conflict, this endless war, seemed to be reaching its breaking point. The Decepticons had gained ground today, and the Autobots were on the defensive. Bumblebee checked his energy levels, low but not empty. He could still fight. He charged forward, dodging blasts from Megatron's fusion cannon. The Decepticon leader, the laughter, boomed across the battlefield, a deep, menacing sound that chilled Bumblebee's circuit. Foolish Autobot, Megatron sneered. You think you can challenge me? I'll tear you apart. Bumblebee said nothing. Words wouldn't save him here. He was smaller, more agile, but Megatron's brute strength was unparalleled. All he had was his speed and his wit. As Bumblebee darted between the ruins of destroyed machinery, his scanners picked up an anomaly, a strange energy signature pulsing nearby. It wasn't your Autobot, and it wasn't a Decepticon. Whatever it was powerful. He ducked behind another piece of debris, just as Megatron unleashed a barrage of fire, pulverizing the ground where Bumblebee had been standing moments before. But Bumblebee wasn't interested in the firepower. His sensors were locked on the anomaly, a glowing rift in the air, about 50 meters away. It was a swirling vortex of energy tearing through the fabric of space itself, the edges crackling with unstable power. What in the world? Bumblebee muttered. His brief distraction cost him. Megatron lunged, closing the distance in a blink, his massive hand wrapping around Bumblebee's sense frame. With a vicious snarl, Megatron hoisted Bumblebee into the air. Your time is up, Autobot. Bumblebee struggled, his servos whirring in protest as he tried to free himself from Megatron's crushing grip. But then something strange happened. The energy rift pulsed, and a powerful shockwave rippled out, engulfing them both. Bumblebee's optics widened in shock as the fabric of reality around them warped, twisting in ways that defied comprehension. Before either of them could react, the rift expanded and swallowed them whole. The battlefield disappeared in an instant. Bumblebee hit the ground hard, his system screaming in protest as he bounced across the rocky terrain. Dust filled the air, and for a moment, everything was a blur. His audio receptors buzzed with static, and his optics struggled to adjust to the sudden change in environment. Groaning, Bumblebee pushed himself to his feet, his servos trembling from the impact. The world around him was unfamiliar, vast, barren, and devoid of any technology. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground was covered in dense vegetation and jagged rock formation. Where am I? He muttered to himself, scanning the area. His internal systems worked to recalibrate, and after a moment, they confirmed the unthinkable. This was Earth, but not the Earth he knew. The readings were off by millions of years. This was ancient Earth, long before human civilization, long before the Autobot Decepticon War had ever reached its shore. Before he could process this fully, a low rumbling growl echoed across the landscape. Megatron. Bumblebee turned to see the massive Decepticon emerging from a pile of debris, his crimson optics glowing with fury. You, Megatron snarled, his voice dripping with hatred.
What have you done?
I didn't hear you do anything, Bumblebee snapped back, his voice unsteady as he prepared for another fight. But something told him this wasn't the place for a brawl. His optics darted around, and he noticed strange metallic structures dotting the landscape, ruins of some kind, overgrown with ancient flora. And then he saw them, giant, hulking figures moving in the distance. Mechanical creatures. Bumblebee froze as one of the massive beasts stepped into view. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, an enormous lumbering machine, easily 3 times the size of any Cybertronian. Its body was a strange blend of organic and mechanical components, with vines and foliage growing from its joints and armor plating. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green light, and its movements were slow but deliberate. Megatron's gaze followed Bumblebee's, and for a brief moment, both Autobots and Decepticons were united in their awe and apprehension. What are those things? Bumblebee asked, though he knew Megatron had no more answers than he did. They ring nothing compared to me, Megatron growled, clenching his fist. I will crush them just like I'll crush you. Before Bumblebee could respond, the giant mechanical creature turned its gaze toward them. Its glowing eyes locked onto their position, and with a deafening roar, its sharp instinct kicked in. Bumblebee darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature saw a massive foot as it stomped down where he had been standing. The ground shook with the impact, and debris flew in all directions. Megatron, on the other hand, didn't flinch. He raised his fusion cannon and fired a concentrated blast of energy directly at the creature's siloed head. The shot connected, and for a moment, it looked like the beast might fall to. But then it roared again, seemingly unfazed by the attack, and swung one of its massive limbs toward Megatron. The Decepticon leader was thrown backward, slamming into a nearby rock formation with enough force to crack the stone. Bumblebee watched in disbelief. Megatron's sci-fi power had always been unmatched, but this creature had shrugged off his attack like it was nothing. Whatever these things were, they were built to withstand serious punishment. "We need to get out of here," Bumblebee shouted, scrambling to his feet. Megatron growled, pushing himself up from the rubble, but he didn't argue. Even he could see that this was a fight they couldn't win, not now at least. The two of them retreated, the giant mechanical beast lumbering after them, its footsteps shaking the ground. As they ran, Bumblebee's sensors continued to scan the environment, trying to make sense of where they were and how they had ended up here. The energy signature from the rift was gone, and there was no indication of how or when they would be able to return to their own time. But one thing was clear, they weren't alone on this ancient Earth, and whatever these mechanical creatures were, they were dangerous. Bumblebee and Megatron reached a narrow canyon, the walls rising high above them. It was a temporary refuge, but it would give them a moment to regroup. "What's your plan, Megatron?" Bumblebee asked, still on edge. "Because right now, fighting each other isn't going to get us anywhere." Megatron glared at him, his optics glowing with malice. "Don't mistake this for a truce, Audiobook. The moment we were out of this mess, I will end you." Bumblebee didn't doubt it for a second, but for now he needed Megatron as much as Megatron needed him. Together they stood a chance of surviving long enough to find a way back to their time. "We need to figure out what those things are," Bumblebee said, keeping his distance from the towering Decepticon. "And if there's a way to use this environment to our advantage." Megatron's optics narrowed. "There's more to this place than meets the eye," he muttered, his gaze drifting toward the ancient ruins that littered the landscape. "These creatures, they regarding something powerful." Bumblebee followed his gaze. The ruins were strange, almost alien, even to him. They weren't of Cybertronian design, but there was a sense of familiarity in the technology, a sense that whoever had built this place had access to advanced knowledge far beyond what existed in their time. "Whatever it is, we need to find it," Bumblebee said, his determination growing. "If it's powerful enough to be guarded by those things, it might be our only way back." Megatron smirked for once. "Audiobook, we agree." Together, the unlikely allies ventured deeper into the canyon, knowing that their only hope of survival and escape lay in uncovering the secrets of this ancient world. Bumblebee and Megatron moved cautiously through the narrow canyon, the towering stone walls on either side casting long shadows over the uneven ground. The distant roars of the mechanical creatures echoed faintly behind them, reminding them that time wasn't tied on their side. Neither spoke, though. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was tense, filled with the constant undercurrent of animosity that had fueled their rivalry for so long. As they emerged from the canyon, the landscape opened up before them, revealing a sprawling valley littered with ancient ruins, metallic structures that looked like they had been part of a massive city once now, overgrown with vegetation and weathered by time. Bumblebee's optics zoomed in on several towering monoliths in the distance, each one covered in strange symbols and markings. The structures seemed to pulse with a faint otherworldly glow, as if they were still alive in some way. "We were not alone here," Bumblebee muttered under his breath, scanning for any signs of life. The mechanical beasts were one thing, but something about these ruins felt aware. Megatron's optics glowed with interest as he gazed at the structure. "This is not the work of primitives," he said, his voice low and contemplative. "There is power here, Audiobook, power we must see." Seized, Bumblebee turned toward him, incredulous. "We don't even know what we were dealing with. We need to find a way back, not get distracted by it." Before he could finish, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Bumblebee's optics widened as cracks began to spiderweb across the surface, and without warning, the earth gave way beneath them. Both Autobots and Decepticons tumbled into the dark, disappearing into the abyss below. They landed in what appeared to be an underground chamber. The walls were lined with the same strange metallic materials as the ruins above, and in the center of the room stood an enormous circular structure, a ring-like device, ancient and dormant. Energy pulsed faintly from its core, like the slow beating of a heart. Bumblebee groaned, pushing himself up from the ground. His internal systems were struggling to stabilize after the fall, but his optics quickly locked onto the device. It was unmistakable. This was some sort of ancient portal. His scanners indicated a faint energy signature that resembled the rift that had brought them here. Megatron was already on his feet, his gaze fixed on the portal. "This is it," he growled. "This is how we return to our time." Bumblebee hesitated. "We don't even know how it works. It's been dormant for who knows how long." "Then we will make it work." Megatron snapped, striding toward the control panel that was embedded into the wall near the portal. His fingers danced over the symbols, his mind racing as he tried to decipher the ancient language. As Megatron worked, Bumblebee's cell sensors detected movement. His optics darted to the shadows, where he saw the silhouette of one of the mechanical creatures, much smaller than the ones they'd encountered above, but no less threatening. It slunk toward them, its glowing eyes fixed on the two Cybertronians. Without hesitation, Bumblebee raised his blaster and fired, the shot lighting up the chamber as it struck the creature dead center. It let out a metallic screech before collapsing in a heap of broken parts. "That was just a scout," Bumblebee warned, keeping his blaster at the ready. "More will be coming." "Then buy me time." Megatron growled, his focus never leaving the control panel. "I need to activate the portal." Bumblebee gritted his teeth, knowing that Megatron was right. As much as he hated it, they had to work together for now. He positioned himself near the entrance of the chamber, scanning for any more of the mechanical beast. His optics picked up several more heat signatures moving toward them. The creatures attacked in waves, each one more aggressive than the last. Bumblebee's blasters fired rapidly, taking out the smaller ones with precision shots, but it wasn't too long before larger beasts started to appear. These were more resilient, their armor thicker, and their movements more calculated. Bumblebee dodged and weaved his servos, working overtime as he evaded their strikes, but the sheer number of them was overwhelming. He couldn't hold them off forever. "Megatron, whatever you were doing, do it faster," Bumblebee shouted as he blasted another creature that lunged toward him. "Silence, Autobot," Megatron snarled, though Bumblebee could hear the strain in his voice. The Decepticon leader was struggling to make sense of the ancient technology, his frustration mounting as the symbols on the control panel continued to defy his understanding. Suddenly, a low hum filled the chamber. Bumblebee glanced over his shoulder to see the portal beginning to flicker with life, its dormant rings rotating slowly as energy coursed through them. The portal was activating. Megatron stepped back from the control panel, a satisfied smirk on his face. "It's sorry, Doc." Bumblebee didn't have time to respond. The largest of the mechanical creatures, a towering, four-legged monstrosity, charged into the chamber, its massive limbs shaking the ground with each step. Bumblebee barely had time to dive out of the way as it swung one of its claws at him, narrowly missing his head. "Megatron," Bumblebee shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to go now." Megatron's optics narrowed as he glanced at the portal. Agreed. Without another word, the two Cybertronians sprinted toward the portal. The mechanical beast roared behind them, its massive form barreling through the chamber, determined to stop them. Bumblebee's systems screamed in protest as he pushed himself harder, his feet pounding against the metallic floor as the portal loomed ahead. Just as they reached the edge of the portal's energy field, the creature lunged at them. Bumblebee felt its claws graze his back, but he didn't stop. With a final surge of power, he and Megatron leaped into the portal, the energy field enveloping them in a blinding light. The world around them twisted and distorted once again, the familiar sensation of being torn through time and space overwhelming their senses. Bumblebee's optics flickered, his systems struggling to process the overwhelming input. It felt like they were suspended in a void, hurtling through the time stream with no control over their destination. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Bumblebee and Megatron tumbled out of the portal, landing hard on the ground. Bumblebee's systems groaned in protest, and he took a moment to recalibrate. When he finally opened his optics, he was greeted by the sight of familiar surroundings. They were back. The battlefield was still smoldering, the signs of their earlier conflict scattered across the landscape. The war between the Autobots and Decepticons was far from over, but for now, they had returned to their own time. Bumblebee slowly got to his feet, his optics scanning the horizon. Megatron was already standing, his towering form silhouetted against the fading light. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of what they had just experienced hanging heavy in the air. But the moment of silence didn't last long. "This changes nothing," Autobot Megatron growled, his voice cold and hard. "Our war continues." Bumblebee nodded, his stance shifting into a defensive posture. He knew that their alliance had been nothing more than a temporary necessity. Now that they were back, the old animosities would resume. Megatron turned and began walking away, his fusion cannon humming ominously as he disappeared into the distance. Bumblebee watched him go, his own blasters at the ready in case of an ambush, but Megatron didn't look back. The Autobot let out a sigh of relief once Megatron was out of sight. For now, the battle was over, but as Bumblebee looked out over the ruins of the battlefield, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ancient power they had discovered would come back to haunt them. The time rift, the mechanical creatures, the ruins, they were all pieces of a puzzle that was far from solved, and as long as Megatron was still out there, the future remained uncertain.